You may think I've said some superfluous things today, but I doubt I've said anything, ever, really, quite as superfluous as introducing Alexander McCobin to a group of liberty-minded students. But I'm going to do it anyway. McCobin is a graduate student in philosophy at Georgetown. He cites Ayn Rand among his intellectual influences. But more importantly, he is one of the greatest leaders we have in the liberty movement. He co-founded Students for Liberty, and as executive director has led it from its origins in a 100-person conference in 2008 to a 1,400-person conference this year. Perhaps more remarkable, under his leadership, SFL has grown to a worldwide network of student groups, active not only in North America, but in Latin America, Europe, and Africa. So please welcome Alexander McCobin.
Thank you, Alexander, for those very kind words. It's an honor to be with everyone today. I apologize if I don't bring my A game to this talk. I got a little sick last night, but we're going to power on through this, and hopefully it'll still be entertaining and informative enough for you nonetheless. So, for most of this conference, you're going to be hearing talks about the meaning of objectivism and the importance of objectivism to leading a meaningful life and the nuances of the philosophy. What I want to talk about for this session is how you can take these ideas, this philosophy, back to your universities and help introduce it to other individuals, as well as work to really start to build an objectivist student movement. Over the past several years, we've seen a tremendous growth in the number of general pro-liberty student organizations around the world. As Alexander Cohen mentioned, Students for Liberty went from 100 to 1,400 person conference this past year. We went from 42 student groups in 2008 to over 900 in our network at the end of this past academic year. Unfortunately, only a small number of them are objectivist student groups. Through an initiative between Students for Liberty and the Atlas Society this past year, we saw an increased amount of activity to educate young people about objectivism on campus. But there's still a lot more work to do. And really, it comes down to everyone in this room to take it upon yourself to be the ones who actually make the difference, who help spread objectivism to more students on more campuses. And I want to cover some ways to do that here. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty of what to actually do, I want to talk about objectivism and organizing in general, because some people might think objectivist organizing is an oxymoron. I had friends in college who said that very thing to me. But it's actually not true. Objectivism's individualism advocates mutually beneficial exchanges. It's opposed to imposing beliefs and actions on other people. It's not opposed to collaboration or even group formation. The objectivist philosophy is a way of providing guidance for how we can form meaningful relationships with other human beings and how we can form legitimate groups in society and how we can form a just and fair society. So, before we get into anything else, it's important for you to get out of your mind that just because objectivism advocates individualism doesn't mean that objectivism is opposed to social interaction or groups. They're very much intertwined with one another. Now, there are some pitfalls to objectivist organizing that we've seen over the past several generations. Unfortunately, the objectivist movement hasn't been able to really stay together with itself very much. And there are a few things that you really ought to avoid if you're going to be forming objectivist groups on campus or holding objectivist events. The first is don't try to demand conformity from every individual who's a member of your organization on every issue out there. No group that tries to do that lasts for very long. And it certainly doesn't become bigger than a couple of individuals in the organization, whether you're talking about objectivist groups or any other philosophy or any other activity. Don't start off by thinking that people who are not completely objectivist are evil. There are many reasons people might not be objectivist. They may have never heard of the philosophy before. They may not understand the nuances. They might have been fed stereotypes and false opinions of the philosophy before. Or they may just not have had enough time to really think it through, even if they were introduced to this before. People who are not objectivist can still be rational, well-intentioned people. What you ought to do is introduce objectivism and have conversations with them to hopefully explain what the philosophy means and get them to realize the veracity and legitimacy of it. What's more, make sure that you collaborate with other organizations on the issues where you can. The most successful student groups and events that are held on campus are not the ones that are run by a single organization that tries to turn everyone else away. They're run by groups and individuals who want to collaborate with other organizations, who want to bring as many people into the fold as possible. So whenever you can, work with the Libertarian Club on campus. Even work with, say, the College Republicans or College Democrats. Maybe there's an environmentalist group on campus where you can have a conversation about objectivism and environmentalism. Just because they don't agree with all of the same principles that we do doesn't mean we can't work with them on those issues where we do agree. Remember, what we're trying to do is build a movement, a common cause by which many individuals come together to advocate certain issues, not a religion, where everyone abides by the exact same beliefs dictated to them by any particular text or individual. There is a fundamental difference that we need to make sure we understand and implement when building an objectivist student movement. Now, this is the first question for the audience. Who do you think is the ideal objectivist organizer? Anyone? No.
John Galt.
Why? That's exactly right, but why?
He understands the philosophy best.
Yeah, he does. But Ayn Rand understood the philosophy pretty darn well. She wasn't necessarily the best organizer behind the movement, though. Why is John Galt the best character that we have to represent objectivist organizing?
I think that maybe he didn't impose his philosophy upon others. Rather, he tried to create shared meaning with the rest of the people that surround him.
He didn't impose it upon people, absolutely. Anything else? Yes?
Something you can rally around is kind of like a banner or a kind of a rallying cry for certain ideas that everybody recognizes that phrase, who is John Galt. Something that people can kind of connect over.
Mm-hmm. Create a symbol where everyone is able to come together and rally around, absolutely. Yeah.
I think he understood the value of anonymity when it comes to rallying around with different, approaching different groups.
So what's the value of anonymity for him?
Because he was rallying different groups and he didn't want to kind of scare them off regarding what they've heard, like in terms of objectivism. So he worked with them on the things that he agreed with, like each individual.
He was very strategic, and he focused on making sure he got the right organizations involved in the right issues in what he was doing, absolutely. But the main reason I think John Galt is the best objectivist organizer is because he recognized that he couldn't change the world on his own. As much as John Galt is represented as the ideal human being, as someone who could change the world by himself, he didn't actually do that. He started a movement. He took all of the men of mind from the world out of society, brought them to Galt's Gulch to form a new society on their own. He literally organized individuals and depended upon the best people to help him change the world. That's what we need to do to build an objectivist movement. So think of the actual steps that he took. First, he identified the best and brightest, the men of reason in his world, and he convinced them to go with him, create a new society. After he did that, and after society began to feel the effects of all of the rational individuals leaving them, he explained his ideas to the world. He got on the radio and publicly announced to everyone what the objectivist philosophy was, why it was valuable, and why they ought to change the way society is run if they want these individuals to come back and participate in it. And then he went through and executed his plans at all times. He stood by the strategy, he stuck to his principles, no matter what came through the rest of the book. In a lot of ways, John Galt was actually building upon his theory of social change from F.A. Hayek's article, The Intellectuals and Socialism. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you do. I'm happy to email it to anyone after this. But Hayek argues that the way that you change actual policies in society is you don't begin by actually going and lobbying government, you don't get certain people elected. You have to go through a process, which first starts with changing the ideas that are prominent in society. you first need to get intellectuals to produce the right ideas that are then dissipated to second-hand dealers of ideas. People on television, people who write op-eds in newspapers and so forth, that spread the ideas to other people. And then, when the idea is spread to so many, the right political parties, the right politicians, the right policies will be implemented in society. But you will only affect true social change when you change the hearts and minds of individuals across society. John Galt was trying to do. He was trying to show people what happens when certain ideas truly prevailed and reason and objectivism was taken out of it. And by doing so, show them the importance of a rational perspective of life. Another way to think about this is by taking this quote from Ludwig von Mises in Human Action, where he writes that the supremacy of public opinion determines not only the singular role that economics occupies in the complex of thought and knowledge, it determines the whole process of human history. The flowering of human society depends on two factors: the intellectual power of outstanding men to conceive sound social and economic theories, and the ability of those or other men to make these ideologies palatable to the majority. And when he talks about social and economic theories, Mises is actually talking about philosophy, especially if you've read the first few hundred pages of Human Action. It's almost straight philosophy. What this means is that there are two things that change the world: people and ideas. Our ideas, say a philosophy, are the means of interpreting the world around us and determining our best reactions to it. When we create new ideas, we create new ways of how human beings can and ought to act that can provide guidance for what to do. But we still rely upon people, because people, the world we live in is defined by those who are in it, and the ideas they use to create the world around us, to build buildings, to create policies, to do anything else. Without the right people, an idea does not exist. So another way to think about this is that ideas without people are impotent. People without ideas are dangerous. We know that we have the right ideas. Objectivism is correct. Philosophically, it provides the most sound approach to leading a meaningful life in reality. Empirically, it produces more prosperity for more people than any other worldview. I am one especially to say that I think objectivist literature and the ideas, the nuances of the philosophy need to be further refined, and there may need to be certain revisions to standard premises in most people's interpretation of objectivism. But we generally sense that objectivism is correct. What our greatest need is people. For too long, the objectivist movement hasn't had the right people, or at least not nearly enough of the right people, advocating these ideas to introduce objectivism to more people and to show them the importance of the philosophy. And in particular, we need our generation, today's youth, what the media calls millennials, to be the ones who really take up this call to arms. Because people are more open to ideas when they're young, and they're more set in their ways when they're old. Students on campus are more open to actually considering new philosophies, new approaches to the world. This is the time to introduce objectivism to them. What's more, today's youth inspire older generations. Older individuals look to see what today's youth believe and think, to have a sense as to what's going to come down the road. And today's non-student objectivists will become more inspired and will be willing to do more for the movement if they think there's a future to it because young people are involved. Third, it will take time to change the common view of the world held in society. It takes a while to spread ideas. I forget how long Atlas Shrugged actually took in the book, but it was over a decade, I believe. We need to have a similar perspective of trying to change society over the next 10, 20 years, perhaps even more, but getting started right now to do it. And we also need to recognize that we are part of the most libertarian generation that's ever existed. From a political perspective, young people are more socially tolerant and fiscally responsible than any generation that's come before us, whether you look at studies in the United States, the United Kingdom, or anywhere else. And their openness to libertarianism means that they are open to objectivism. looking for a solid grounding of the political principles by which they already identify. We have an opportunity to introduce objectivism to them to provide that grounding. So, now that we've covered objectivist organizing in general, you might be wondering, why student groups? Why should that be something that you ought to start on campus? Well, creating objectivist student groups or just building an objectivist student movement is meant to accomplish a few things that should always be in the back of your minds. The first is to identify already existing objectivist students. Whether you believe it or not, there are more objectivists on your campus than just you. You may not know them, they may not know you, but they do exist. It's very easy for objectivist students to simply hide their beliefs or, in fact, give up on objectivism, whether it's out of social pressure or the lack of opportunities to develop their views of the philosophy. What they need is a home on your campus to find other objectivist students, to talk about these ideas in a safe place where they're not immediately defending their interest in Ayn Rand from the beginning. This is one of the most important things that you can do when starting an objectivist student group or running events for objectivism on campus. Find those students who are already interested in these ideas and cultivate them. Keep them involved in the philosophy. I already mentioned before that students are open to new ideas. They're especially open to the possibility of objectivism given their political preferences today. But they need to be introduced to it to actually understand it, and they need to be introduced to objectivism the right way. So when you're running events and activities, try to find those open-minded students. Give them material on objectivism, and have as your ultimate goal actually helping them become objectivists, become fans of philosophy, or people who actually advocate the philosophy and will build upon it, revising it as necessary, or advancing it to more people in the world. And lastly, we want to build an objectivist student movement to make objectivism a serious position to philosophical opponents. Let's face it, there's some people that are opposed to objectivism and always will be. You're not going to change their mind no matter how many hours you spend arguing with them or cultivating them. So don't waste your time on that. There are many other people that you can actually help retain in objectivism or bring into the movement than you will get by just arguing with people endlessly. But we have to recognize that these people may still be influential down the road. We want those people who are fundamentally opposed to objectivism to still take the philosophy seriously, not as something that they can just make a wisecrack about and move on, but something that they need to actually debate in a public forum because they recognize that it's a legitimate philosophy even if they disagree with it. So even though you don't want to spend your time trying to convince enemies of objectivism to actually become them objectivists if you don't think it's possible, you do want to take them seriously. You do want to present yourself and objectivism in the right way so that they're willing to engage you in public debates, that they're willing to consider objectivism as a rational alternative to any other philosophy out there, rather than simply make jokes and thereby try to silence our voices. Objective student groups are really important right now, and I've reiterated this from before, but it's to build upon the student movement for liberty that's growing around the world. They're open to ways to defend liberty. They need better arguments to defend liberties. They're open to objectivism. They simply haven't been exposed to it properly, and you can be the ones who actually introduce it to them. All right. Now, moving beyond the generalities of objective student organizing, you're probably wondering, okay, how do I actually go out and help build an objective student movement? Well, there are two ways in my mind. One is by starting groups. The other is running events. You can start a student group on your campus dedicated exclusively to promoting an understanding of objectivism in the community. That's the mission of the organization. You have leadership structure and resources dedicated solely to that end. And I'll talk in a moment about what would go into starting an objectivist student group. But I recognize it may be difficult to start a group dedicated solely to objectivism, finding enough people to do that to begin with, getting the resources and so forth. So if you're not quite ready to start an objectivist student group, you can run objectivist events with other organizations on campus that are open to doing so. Whether it's the College Libertarians, Students for Liberty, perhaps College Republicans, College Democrats, and so forth, find existing institutions and provide them with some resources, some ways to just get objectivist-oriented events going on campus, to build up interest in these ideas and hopefully work towards building an objectivist-oriented student group. So, suppose you want to go out and start an objective student group on your campus. You're gung-ho, ready to do it right now. Students for Liberty has an entire handbook on our website on how to start an objective student organization. But we have 4 pretty simple steps that you can follow to give you a sense as to what is required for this. First, you need to find other objectivists who would be good group leaders. By definition, a group requires more than one person. If you're the only person trying to create an objective student group, you don't have a group yet. You need to get other individuals involved. But you especially need to get them involved because the amount of work that goes into running an organization is more than any individual person can handle, especially when you come from the perspective of just marketing events, getting more people to hear your ideas. You need multiple individuals to be talking about the group and everything that you do on campus beyond just your circle of friends. Then, once you have a core group of leaders to get the group started, your second step is to develop a purpose to the group, i.e. a mission statement. Now, it could be that you're just generally supporting objectivism. It could be that you want to be a very educational organization where you're just introducing objectivism to the community. It might be that you want this to be an activist group. You want to get out there and protest in favor of positions that objectivism stands for. Or it could be that you want this to be a very advanced reading group for those people who are already incredibly knowledgeable about objectivism and want to get into the nitty-gritty of the philosophy. It's up to you to decide what you want to do. Once you have that purpose, though, your third step is to put together a plan for events. Because this is really what defines an organization over the course of a year. What events does it run and how effective are they for whatever purpose you have? And I'll talk about the different purposes to events in a minute. But then lastly, put the plan in action. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to individuals who are ready to start a group, get everything in order, develop this really well-written constitution, perhaps even put a strategic plan together, and then just fall off the earth. Execution is incredibly difficult. That's where most of your work is going to go. It will involve 2 a.m. projects that you're working on. It will involve cutting out class sometimes, perhaps, to make sure you go get a meeting to get permission to use a room from administrators or any number of things. Execution is as important as anything else in these steps, though, so make sure you follow through. Now, whether you're running an objective student group or you're just holding objectives-oriented events to bring these ideas to campus, you need to rely upon these events in order to actually spread the philosophy. Because when you actually run the events, you need to market them. In marketing a particular event on campus, you're marketing the objectivist philosophy. You're putting the ideas out there for people to consider. When you actually run these events, you give people leadership experience. Those who invite a speaker to campus, those who organize a protest, are learning how to actually be leaders of objectivism and bring people together for a common cause. So you want to run as many of these events as possible to give that leadership experience to other people in your group, as well as build up your own leadership skills. And for people who attend events, that's the way they actually learn about objectivism. It's the way they're able to understand what the philosophy means and how to apply it afterwards. So whether it's promoting events, developing leaders, or educating people, events are the bread and butter for objectivist student organizing. Now, you can think of events as trying to accomplish various goals. You might have an event that's trying to introduce objectivism to newcomers, people who are open-minded but may not know a lot about it. You may want to run an event to develop an understanding of objectivism for those advanced students, people who are already involved, so that they understand the philosophy better. Or perhaps you want to run events that advances the philosophy itself by either building upon or revising previous works in objectivism, perhaps having one of the students in your organization present a paper on a new area of thought that objectivism hasn't been applied to before, or holding a debate on a controversial topic in objectivism. Keep in mind that whichever one of these purposes you go for when you're organizing an event, they are very different purposes. My recommendation is that when you organize an event, pick one of them and stick to it. If you want to develop an understanding of objectivism for advanced students, you're not going to want a whole lot of newcomers in the room and get scared off by the technical jargon that you're going to be talking about there. What's more, if you have advanced students in your group, you can't only run introductory events where you go through basic articles or you bring in an outside speaker to talk about the basics of objectivism. You need to figure out what you're trying to accomplish and have a diversity of events to appeal to the many students in your group for that. So here's a quick laundry list of potential events that you can actually run on campus. One, you can invite an outside speaker to come in, perhaps someone from the Atlas Society, for example, that is willing to come to your campus and talk either about objectivism generally or a particular issue as it relates to objectivism.
And yes, a bunch of us are available.
There we go, talk to Alexander after this. Or you can have one of the advanced students in your organization give a talk themselves. Have them try to develop their own perspective on objectivism or explain it to other individuals in the group. Again, that not only educates people about objectivism, it gives people in your group leadership and teaching experience, which is incredibly valuable for them. You can hold a debate on a controversial point in objectivism. You could hold a reading group where you actually try and work through one of Ayn Rand's books or some other objectivist literature over the course of a semester, perhaps. You can screen a movie. More and more objectivist movies are coming out, whether it's Atlas Shrugged Parts 1 and 2, and hopefully 3 coming out soon. You could try and get a copy of We the Living in Italian from the 1940s or 50s, I think. It's actually a fantastic black and white movie. I highly recommend it. Or take more Hollywood-oriented movies that you think are objectivist, screen them, and talk about why you think they're objectivist. For example, I walked out of The Dark Knight Rises the night that it premiered saying Batman is an objectivist. He is basically John Galt. It makes sense. He is a businessman, incredibly wealthy. He is just a regular individual, not a superhero with superpowers, but he's dedicated to people living rationally. In the movie, he didn't like to give to charity or go to charity events because it's a waste of money for the most part. He was about building a free society for people. And then there were plenty of other undertones about the villains being kind of and whatnot, so I think it was fantastic. I recommend that movie, but think of other ones where you might be able to pull objectivist themes from. And lastly, attend another event. Get more students from your school out to the Atlas Summit next year and start preparing them for it right now. Bring out your group to a Students for Liberty Regional Conference. We're going to be running 18 regional conferences across the United States and Canada. We're going to be running 8 over in Europe, a few down in Brazil, a few more in Latin America, and all over the place. So wherever you are, we've got conferences going on. And use those events as a way to build bonds between group members, as well as just have a lot of fun. So before I wrap up and go into Q&A, just want to give you a few general tips about objective student organizing. First, it's all about people. The objectivist movement needs more people to embrace the philosophy and be leaders of this philosophy for us to really have a difference. And whether you're talking about an organization, a club, or anything else, the people are really what define it. Heck, John Galt basically followed Jim Collins' principle of just getting the right people on the bus before deciding what direction to take it in. John Galt didn't say that he was going to try and push certain policies through in society or have certain consequences result from his actions. No. He simply said, I'm going to take the best and brightest minds out of society. I'm just going to get the right people to come with me, and we're going to figure out the best way to change the world from there. That's what you need to do with your groups too. You need to find the best and brightest that you can introduce objectivism to, or the best and brightest already existing objectives to be a part of this, and figure out how you can promote this philosophy on campus from there. Tip number 2, break it down to the basics. If you're running an objectivist student group, all of you here at the Atlas Summit, I'm assuming, have some basic experience with objectivism, some understanding, maybe some more than others, but probably a fair number of advanced students here. You probably know a lot about objectivism. The people that you reach out to on campus don't. So when you're talking to them, don't assume they know certain things. Don't assume that they've read every book. Don't assume that they understand the difference between metaphysics and epistemology. Be willing to introduce these ideas to them and explain it in the most fundamental way that you can. And don't hold it against them if they don't understand these concepts. The difference between metaphysics and epistemology is something that I've had to explain to undergraduates many times over, and you will have to explain to a lot of individuals if you really want them to understand the philosophy. That's fine. That's how people learn. Figure out whatever strategy you need to employ to do that. Tip 3, break stereotypes. I think we need to do this for objectivism even more than we need to do this for libertarianism. Because there's far too many, and it's been too easy for people who dislike objectivism to stereotype objectivists as heartless, or people who don't care about emotions in any way, are shills for big business and nothing more, or that objectivists don't even think on their own. They just cite line and verse from Ayn Rand's novels and do nothing else. Unfortunately, in a number of these cases, they've got legitimate examples to cite that we need to break away from. And the only way to do that is by actually doing so. You going out there and showing that you really care about emotions, that there's a connection between reason and emotion. By criticizing big business whenever they get in with big government and so undermine the free market system. And be willing sometimes to say that Ayn Rand was wrong. She didn't get everything right. Objectivism is not Randianism. Objectivism is a particular philosophy based on principles, not just on what one individual said. Tip 4, focus on the ends. It's all too easy with student groups to just go through the motions. We'll hold our weekly meeting. We're going to just run this event because we planned it a month ago and sort of zone out through the whole process. Always think about why you're running the group to begin with. That's why the first 2 sections of this PowerPoint focused on the general issues of objectivist organizing. Because they're more important than the section in this PowerPoint describing what you should actually do. Because I can only give you ideas for events to run or how to start a student group. You're going to have to figure out your own way of organizing on campus. You're going to have to come up with your own types of events. Heck, you might come back and email me later on and say that I was wrong. A certain type of event I recommended to you was a bad idea. I hope you do, and you have good reasons for it. Because it means you're being reflective. You're thinking about what you're actually trying to accomplish in running your group or organizing events. And you're focusing on the ends of spreading the philosophy. And quick plug here, shamelessly, Access Students for Liberty. If you don't know much about us, go to our website, studentsforliberty.org. We have handbooks on student organizing and on objectivist organizing in particular. We have campus coordinators located all over the country in the United States and Canada who are there to be resources, basically people to help troubleshoot problems, help you start groups, organize events, and so forth. Outside of the United States, we're going to have about 50 European local coordinators this year. We've got about 30 local coordinators across Latin America, more in Brazil and so forth. We have people everywhere who exist to help you organize these events and groups. You are not in this on your own. Request copies of our new book, Why Liberty. We have 350,000 copies of them that we're distributing to students for free. It's an incredible book, minus the one article that Tom Palmer let some guy named Alexander McCobin slide in there, but otherwise, fantastic. And of course, come out to our regional and international conferences. We want you there. We're here to use these forums to help educate you about liberty and how to advance them on campus, and they really are a ton of fun. So I'll end with a call to arms from F.A. Hayek. At the end of The Intellectuals and Socialism, if you didn't have good enough reason to read the article already, Hayek says, unless we can make the philosophic foundations of a free society once more a living intellectual issue, and its implementation a task which challenges the ingenuity and the imagination of our liveliest minds, we cannot hope for change. But if we can regain that belief in the power of ideas, which was the mark of liberalism at its best, the battle is not lost. The intellectual revival of liberalism is already underway in many parts of the world. Will it be in time? Hayek wrote that in 1949. We had some bad decades after that. But I think it's even more true today that we have an opportunity. But it's going to depend on everyone in this room being willing to take advantage of that. Thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to
It's time to ask him now.
Dr. Gradecki, University of Edinburgh. My question is whether the objectivist stance towards religion is not a problem in gathering numbers, because we still have quite a few religious people who perhaps, if they have any clue about objectivism, consider them an atheist philosophy. So how do you address such people, or you shouldn't be bothered with addressing them, but you're just atheists or agnostics?
So the relationship between objectivism and religion, I think, goes back to my point before that you shouldn't simply exclude individuals from the organization if they disagree with you on one tenet or on a few issues there.
See, for those people, for you it's okay. For those people, that's the most, or one of the most important parts. So that's a key point for them.
So, two things. First, if someone says that they're an objectivist except they believe in God or they're religious, I think it's worthwhile to still bring them into your group and have conversations about that. Don't cut off the conversation. Embrace them. Learn why they think that. If you're an atheist objectivist, explain why you think objectivism actually shows that God, or is based upon God not existing, and be willing to talk about it. But secondly, I think there is a broader conversation that's starting to develop between religion and objectivism that I hope is going to really be developed. Just yesterday, the Cato Institute held a forum at its location on a new book that's been published called The Soul of Atlas, written by Mark Henderson, the stepson of John Aguilera, who is the producer behind the Atlas Shrugged movies, where Mark actually is starting to open this conversation, saying that there is more in common between Christianity and objectivism than most people have realized. And that, I'm not sure if he actually says this, but I'll put words in his mouth. That Rand might have been wrong about that to a certain extent. I haven't been able to read the book yet. I just got it yesterday. I'm excited for it. But I think that's something that you should start a conversation about on your campus. Heck, that's one of the ways to break the stereotype of objectivists, is just being godless individuals who aren't even willing to speak to those who are religious. I think that's a terrible stereotype, and that we should have those conversations with them. So, by all means, go for it is my recommendation.
Hi, I'm Tess. I was wondering, in my Young Americans for Liberty organization, all of us are political majors at some extent. So I find it difficult, especially in the context of objectivism, reaching other people that do not already have a political background. What would be your suggestion of trying to reach those people and expanding those with little to no knowledge?
The great thing about objectivism in comparison to libertarianism, or at least an advantage for objectivism, is that it's not just a political system. It's much more than that. You have an opportunity with objectivism to engage people from many different backgrounds. You can engage people in English or literature or art to talk about aesthetics and romanticism. You can engage philosophy majors who don't deal with the political side of things to talk about human reason and the state of what actually exists in the world. You can try to tie objectivism in with economics, perhaps talk about the relationship between Ayn Rand, F.A. Hayek, and John Mises, and so forth. I think you have more openings by running objectivist events to get people who aren't terribly interested in politics to be involved in the things that you're doing. Take advantage of that. Yeah?
Would you say that since the libertarian movement has sort of a monopoly on the political aspects of liberty, would you say that objectivist clubs should focus more on metaphysics and epistemology before engaging in the political aspects, just to kind of offer something much more, as you said, than the other liberty-oriented clubs and groups?
So I think that's going to vary campus by campus and what your libertarian club on campus is doing, if there is one. There's still a fair number of campuses that don't have libertarian groups there yet. But if you're going to start an objectivist club when a libertarian group already exists, I would say make sure that they know that you're doing that. Try to collaborate when you can. Hopefully you won't overlap one another with events, but that doesn't mean your objectivist group doesn't have to be, it can't get into politics as well. Objectivism has a very particular approach to justifying libertarianism, which a number of other libertarians don't agree with. It's very different from, say, the Austrian economics approach or from the Chicago School approach. Encourage dialogues on those issues. Where does objectivism fit in with this? Why is the objectivist defense of libertarianism better than the others? There are many ways for you to be able to still talk about politics even if there is a libertarian club on campus. Yeah.
I'm Lily. For any group or for any event to flourish, it needs some sort of finance, right? So like, what do you propose to help the group to flourish in terms of finance?
So I actually don't think you need much money, if any, to get a student group going. Especially in the beginning phases, there are many ways for you to be able to do this at no cost. That's how I got my student group in undergrad, the Penn Libertarians, off the ground. We ran events in university space, which we got for free as a student group. If we wanted to print flyers, we would go to one of the departments at the university where we knew there was free printing at, and we would just print them there. We would rely upon Facebook to promote events by just creating events that were free. We would email individuals. You can create listservs from Google for free. There are a lot of options available for you to not have to raise any money. But at a certain point, if you want to start holding bigger events and so forth, you may start to require more funds. There are a few obvious avenues to pursue. One is, once your group gets recognized, begin requesting funding from the Student Activities Council. I know there used to be a debate as to whether libertarian student groups should accept funding from student activities funds. I think the debate is pretty much over at this point, and everyone has realized turning that money away is foolish, because if you've already chosen to go to the university and you're paying into the student activities group, then you're already participating in the system. Not to mention, if it's a private university, there should be no qualms whatsoever. It's a voluntary association. If you go to a public university, well, if you're going to a public university already, really, what's the difference here? So look into that, learn how the bureaucracy works and access funds there. And if you really want to get more involved, I will make another shameless plug for Students for Liberty. All of our campus coordinators, students who have run a group on their campus for a year or more, who we then select to put through a summer-long training program and then make responsible for organizing events and starting new groups in their area, all of them have a stipend for the year that they can use for both other groups that they're working with as well as their own. And so that's a way for you to get more funding as well as get connected to more people who can give you more ideas for what to do. How many people here are thinking of starting an objectivist group right now? 3. All right, to start, how many people are thinking about getting objectivist events going with a pro-liberty club or something else on your campus this year? Fantastic. This is actually a trend that we noticed this past year when we launched the Objectivist Initiative with Students for Liberty Campus Society. At first, we tried to focus exclusively on starting objectivist groups, but we realized how difficult it is to do that. So we're going to be providing more resources for you this year to just run objectivist events on your campus by providing you with tabling kits for that, literature, DVDs, things like that. So please, shoot me an email if you want to learn more about ways we can help you with that. If you want to get involved with the Objectivist Initiative, helping build resources and so forth, let us know. We definitely want more help with it. Students for Liberty is run primarily by students who come up with these ideas. And if there's anything else that we can do, just let us know. But that's it. Thanks, everyone.